My family ignored me my whole life and worshipped my sister. But when Grandpa left us $500,000 each, my parents demanded I give my entire share to her. What I did next broke them, and they never saw it coming. I'm 28 years old, work in finance in Boston, and honestly, I need to get this story off my chest because what happened 3 months ago with my grandfather's inheritance basically blew up the entire family dynamic that had been messed up for, I don't know, basically my whole life. And the thing is, it wasn't just about the money, you know what I mean? It was like the moment when everything I'd been putting up with since I was a kid finally came to light and I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay anymore. I guess I should start at the beginning. Though the beginning is kind of fuzzy, because the favoritism toward my sister Emma was always there, for as long as I can remember. My first clear memory was when I turned 7, and my parents, Daniel and Sarah, my dad and my mom, threw me a party that basically consisted of a store-bought cake and my grandparents Richard and Margaret coming over to the house. Nothing special, you know. But it was fine. I was a kid and I was happy, with my cake. But 2 years later, when Emma turned 7, my parents threw her this huge party with like 30 kids, a bouncy castle, a clown, tables decorated with a princess theme, like the whole package. And I remember standing there thinking, seriously? It's that different? But at that moment, I didn't have the words to express it. I just knew it felt wrong. Like there was something unfair, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. The thing is, that pattern repeated itself over and over and over again. When I was like 10 years old, I saved my allowance for months, literally from January to June, to buy myself a bicycle. A normal bicycle. Nothing fancy, but I wanted it so badly. My parents told me that if I wanted one, I had to pay for it myself, because money didn't grow on trees, you know? And that's fine. I learned about responsibility and all that. I finally bought it with my own money and I was super proud. Well, 2 weeks later, Emma saw my bike, threw a tantrum because she wanted one too. And guess what? My parents bought her a better one than mine the next day. One of those expensive mountain bikes with like 20 gears. And when I asked them why they bought her one and made me save up, my mom said something like, "Oh, Taylor, don't be selfish. Your sister deserves nice things too." As if that was the point. And look, it's not like Emma was a bad kid or anything. She was just a kid, you know what I mean? But my parents treated her like she was made of glass, like any little discomfort or disappointment was the end of the world. I remember when I was in 5th grade, I had the lead role in the school play. I'd been rehearsing for months. I was super nervous but excited. The night of the performance. Literally 1 hour before it started, Emma, who was like 7 years old, said her tummy hurt. And my parents immediately decided they couldn't go to my play because they had to stay home with her. Turns out Emma was perfectly fine, probably just wanted attention, but I had to do my performance knowing my parents weren't there. My grandma Margaret did go, thank God, but it hurt so much to see all the other kids with their complete families there, and I only had my grandmother. Things continued like that through my entire adolescence. When I was 15, I got a scholarship for a summer program at Harvard, a super competitive program that only accepted like 50 students in the whole country. It was in July, and I needed someone to take me to the airport because the flight left super early. But it turned out that the same day Emma had a dance recital, like at 2 in the afternoon, and my parents said they couldn't take me because they had to get ready for Emma's recital. I begged my dad, told him the airport was 20 minutes away and the flight was at 6 in the morning, that we'd be back with hours to spare before the recital. But he just told me to find another way to get there. In the end, my grandfather Richard took me, God rest his soul, but the message was clear. Emma was always the priority. What really hurt was when I got accepted to college with a full scholarship. I worked like crazy in school, had a perfect GPA, was in a bunch of extracurricular activities, wrote amazing essays, and got into a really good private university with a full scholarship that covered everything. And my parents basically said, "Oh, that's nice," and went on with their day. They didn't even go with me to orientation. But when Emma decided not to go to college after graduating high school, my parents praised her for knowing what she wanted and not letting herself be pressured by society's expectations. I mean, seriously? I achieved something incredible and they barely notice, But Emma does nothing and she's a hero. So I went off to college and basically distanced myself quite a bit from my family. It wasn't anything dramatic or anything. I just stopped calling as much, stopped going home at every opportunity, focused on my life. I graduated, with honors, got an amazing job in finance, worked like a slave for years, made good contacts, learned everything I could. At 27, just a year ago, I bought my own house. A real house, not a tiny apartment, a 2-story house in a good neighborhood. I paid the entire down payment with my savings. I was super proud. And meanwhile, Emma was still living in my parents' basement. Not that I'm judging her. Everyone lives their own life. But the irony is that my parents continued treating her like their perfect little princess while she literally hadn't done anything independent in her life. She didn't have a stable job, had taken some community college courses here and there but nothing serious, dated different guys that my parents always hated, but somehow Emma never did anything wrong in their eyes. My relationship with my parents at that point was basically non-existent. I saw them at Christmas and Thanksgiving because my grandmother insisted I go, and I went for her. Not for my parents. But even at those family gatherings, it was obvious I was like the awkward guest, while Emma was the star of the show. And then, 3 months ago, my grandfather Richard died. He was 84 and had been sick for a while, so it wasn't a total surprise, but it still hurt like hell. He had always been different with us, with Emma and me. He treated us equally, loved us equally, spent the same amount of time with both of us. He was literally the only person in my nuclear family who made me feel seen and valued. His death devastated me, honestly. The will reading was like 2 weeks after the funeral. I wasn't expecting much, honestly. I knew my grandparents had some money because my grandfather had been successful in real estate, but I didn't think there would be a significant inheritance or anything like that. The meeting was at the lawyer's office. My parents were there, Emma, my grandmother Margaret, some aunts and uncles, and obviously the lawyers. When the lawyer started reading the will, there were the typical things, some donations to charities, some specific items for specific people, and then he got to the part about properties and financial assets. And this is where things got interesting. It turned out that my grandfather, after selling his business years back and making smart investments, had like $2 million in liquid assets. And according to his will, he wanted to divide it equally among his 4 grandchildren, Emma and me, and 2 cousins who live in another state. That meant $500,000 for each of us. I swear, when the lawyer said that amount, I felt like I'd been punched. $500,000. It was an amount of money that would change my life, that would allow me to completely pay off my student loans, invest in my future, maybe even start my own business eventually. I looked at Emma, and she was in shock too. Her eyes were like saucers. But what impacted me most wasn't the amount of money. It was that my grandfather left Emma and me exactly the same amount. He saw us as equals. He valued us equally. After a lifetime of feeling like second best, my grandfather was telling me, even after death, that I was worth just as much as my sister. I don't know if I can explain what that meant to me. I literally started crying right there in the lawyer's office, and I didn't care who saw me. My grandmother took my hand and squeezed it, and when I looked at her, she had tears in her eyes too. She knew exactly why I was crying. I could see it in her face. She had seen all the favoritism for years, had seen how my parents treated me, and I think that's why my grandfather made sure the will was so clear about the equal division. The will also named my father as one of 3 executors, along with my grandmother and my grandfather's lawyer. Basically, they had to work together to distribute the assets according to the will's instructions. At that moment, I didn't think much about it. I assumed it would be a straightforward process. How naive I was. 2 days after the will reading, I got a call from my mom. She started with the typical awkward conversation about the weather and stuff like that, but then she got to the point. She told me that she and my dad had been talking, and they felt I should consider giving my inheritance to Emma. Not part of it. All of it. The full $500,000. I was so shocked, I honestly didn't know what to say for like 10 seconds. I finally asked her why the hell I would do that, and she gave me this whole explanation about how Emma needed the money more than me because I already had a successful career and a house, while Emma was finding her way and needed support. She told me it would be the right thing to do, and that's how real families work. They support each other. I told her no, absolutely not, that money was left to me by my grandfather, that he wanted me to have it, and that I wasn't going to give it up. My mom then changed her tone and got all emotional, saying she was disappointed in me, that she couldn't believe I was being so selfish, that Emma was my sister and I should want to help her. When that didn't work either, she started guilt-tripping me, saying things like, "Your grandfather wouldn't be proud of this attitude," and "I thought we raised you better." I hung up the phone feeling sick to my stomach. I couldn't believe they were actually asking me this. But then I thought, why am I surprised? Of course they'd want me to give everything to Emma. That had been the pattern my whole life. The next 2 weeks were a nightmare. My parents called me constantly, texted me, even showed up at my house one day unannounced. Every time, it was the same conversation. I should give my inheritance to Emma because she needed it more, and every time I told them no. My dad eventually got really angry and yelled at me that I was being incredibly selfish and that I was breaking this family apart. I remember yelling back at him. I said, "When have I really? I've been part of this family? When have you treated me like I mattered as much as Emma?" And he just looked at me like I was crazy, like everything I was telling him was a complete fabrication. And then things got really ugly. My dad, being one of the executors of the will, announced that he was going to redistribute the assets more equitably according to each person's needs. Basically, he was saying he was going to give my money to Emma anyway, without my permission. He said that as executor he had certain discretion about how to interpret the will's intentions. I contacted a lawyer immediately, a good lawyer who specialized in will disputes, and he told me that what my dad was trying to do was completely illegal, that an executor can't just change the terms of a will because he thinks it's better, that this was a flagrant violation of his fiduciary duties. He told me I needed to act fast before my dad did something that could legally complicate things. This is where my grandmother, Margaret, saved everything. When she found out what my dad was trying to do, she immediately called my grandfather's lawyer and demanded an emergency meeting with all 3 executors. At that meeting, in front of both lawyers, my grandmother made it clear to my dad that she wasn't going to allow him to change her husband's will, that Richard had been very specific about his wishes, that he wanted each grandchild to receive exactly the same amount, and that any attempt to change that would be met with immediate legal action. My grandfather's lawyer also intervened and explained to my dad that the will had an anti-contestation clause, which means that if anyone tried to dispute the will or delay its execution without valid cause, they would be removed as beneficiary and executor. And more importantly, the lawyer pointed out that my dad had a clear conflict of interest because his daughter, Emma, would be the direct beneficiary of any changes he made to my distribution. My dad tried to distance, to doubt that in comments, argue that he just wanted to do right by the family, but the lawyer wasn't buying any of it. He told him that either he followed the will exactly as written, or he would be removed as executor immediately and face possible legal consequences for breach of fiduciary duty. My dad had to back down. He had no choice. And 2 weeks later, I received the bank transfer of $500,000 into my account. Emma also received her share. My cousins in the other state also received theirs. Everything exactly as my grandfather had planned. But obviously this didn't end there. My parents were furious with me. My dad left me a voicemail saying I had destroyed this family and that he and my mom no longer wanted anything to do with me. My mom sent me like 50 text messages about how disappointed she was, about how I had shown my true character, about how I had prioritized money over family. What really broke me was when there was a family gathering like a month later. It was my aunt's birthday. My mom's sister and the whole family was going to be there. I didn't want to go, but my grandmother begged me to go, told me she needed support and that she couldn't let my parents control the narrative of what had happened. I went, and it was horrible. My parents basically ignored me all night. But at one point my dad started talking loudly with other relatives about how sad it was when children prioritize money over family and how some kids are so greedy they can't see past a bank account. He didn't mention me by name, but it was obvious he was talking about me. Several relatives looked at me with this expression of pity or judgment, and I just wanted to disappear. Finally, my grandmother had enough. She stood up in the middle of the room and told my dad to shut up, to stop playing the victim. And then, in front of the whole family, she told the truth. She told them that my grandfather Richard had left very clear instructions that each grandchild should receive exactly the same amount. That my dad had tried to take away my inheritance to give it to Emma. That he had abused his position as executor to try to change the will. That she had had to intervene to protect her husband's wishes. She also revealed something I didn't know. Apparently, a few years before he died, my parents had tried to convince my grandfather to leave all his money only to Emma. They had told him that I was doing well financially and didn't need help, while Emma was struggling and needed all the support possible. My grandfather had told them directly that wasn't going to happen, that he loved his grandchildren equally and would treat them equally. My parents apparently got really angry with him about that. The silence in the room after my grandmother finished speaking was deafening. Everyone was looking at my parents, waiting for them to say something. My dad turned red with anger and yelled at my grandmother that she had no right to talk about private conversations. She responded that she had every right because they were conversations about her husband's money. My dad grabbed my mom, and they stormed out of the party furiously. Emma stayed, which was interesting. She looked super uncomfortable and confused, and honestly, I think she didn't know everything our parents had been doing behind the scenes either. That night, after the party, Emma texted me asking if we could meet to talk. I agreed, though I was nervous. We met at a neutral coffee shop the next day. The conversation started super awkward. Emma basically asked me if everything Grandma had said was true, and I told her, yes, that everything was true. I told her about Mom and Dad's calls, about how they pressured me to give her my inheritance, about how Dad tried to use his position as executor to redistribute the money. Emma looked genuinely shocked. I think she honestly didn't know any of this. She asked me why I hadn't told her anything, and I told her I didn't know if she agreed with Mom and Dad or not, that I didn't know which side she was on. And then Emma told me something that surprised me. She told me she knew our parents favored her, that she wasn't blind, that she had seen how they treated me differently our whole lives. But she said she had felt trapped in it, that she felt like if she didn't live up to what they expected of her, being the little princess who needed constant help, then she would lose their love too. She said the relationship she had with our parents was toxic in a different way than mine, that they had made her dependent on them emotionally and financially. I'm not going to lie. Part of me wanted to be angry with her, wanted to blame her for having enjoyed all the favoritism while I suffered. But seeing her there, being honest with me for the first time maybe in our lives, I couldn't. She was also a victim of our parents' dynamic, just in a different way. I asked her why she had never stood up for me, why she had never told Mom and Dad that the unequal treatment wasn't okay. And she started crying, told me she was sorry, that she had been a coward, that she was afraid of losing their approval. She told me that seeing everything from the outside now, she realized how wrong it had all been. Emma then told me something that really impacted me. She told me she planned to use her inheritance to leave, to finally become independent, that she wanted to enroll in college, something our parents had never really encouraged her to do, get her own apartment, start a real life. She told me she realized that living in our parents' basement at 25 wasn't normal or healthy. That conversation was like a turning point for us. For the first time in our lives, Emma and I started building a real relationship as siblings, not conditioned by our parents' dynamic. But obviously, when our parents found out about Emma's plans, they went crazy. My mom called her ungrateful. My dad accused her of being under my bad influence. They tried to convince her that staying home was best, that using the money for college was a waste. They even threatened to sell the family home, as if that was going to make Emma change her mind about her life. But Emma stood firm, and I supported her. I helped her look for apartments, went with her when she registered for college courses, even helped her choose a major. It was weird and nice at the same time to be there for her in this way. Now, 3 months after all this drama, things have settled into a new normal. I paid off all my student loans, like $150,000 that had been hanging over my head for years. The relief of not having that debt is indescribable. I invested a good portion of the rest in a retirement account and some diversified investments. I also donated $50,000 to mental health organizations because after all this, I realized how much I needed therapy myself and how many people don't have access to that. With part of the money, I also established a small scholarship fund in memory of my grandfather Richard, specifically for first-generation college students who come from difficult family situations. The first scholarships will be awarded next year. I feel like that's something my grandfather would have liked. Emma started her classes a month ago. She's studying psychology, which makes sense considering everything we've been through. She has her own small but nice apartment about 20 minutes from the university. We see each other every 2 weeks for lunch to catch up, and honestly, our relationship now is better than it ever was. My mom has tried to reach out to me a couple of times. She started therapy, according to what she told me, and wants to work on our relationship. I'm open to that eventually, but I'm still processing everything. I told her I need time and space, and that when I'm ready, we'll talk. She seemed to understand, or at least accept, which is progress, I guess. My dad, on the other hand, is still the same. He hasn't contacted me directly, but, according to Emma, he keeps saying that I manipulated Emma to alienate her from them, that I divided the family, that all this is my fault. Honestly, I don't expect him to change. Some people are so committed to their narrative that they can't see the truth even when it's right in front of them. My grandmother Margaret continues to be my rock. We talk on the phone at least once a week, and I visit her often. She's told me several times that my grandfather would be proud of me, not just for defending my inheritance, but for how I've handled everything. That means more to me than I can express. Last week, Emma called me excited because she got her first A on a college exam. It's a small detail, but to me, it represents something huge. She's building her own identity, her own achievements, outside of our parents' shadow. And I finally feel like my worth isn't determined by whether my parents see me or not. Is it perfect? No. And does it still hurt? When I think about everything I lost during my childhood and adolescence because my parents couldn't treat me equally? Absolutely. Do I wonder sometimes what my life would have been like if I'd had parents who supported me the same as my sister? All the time. But I also learned that family isn't always the people you share blood with. Sometimes it's the people who see you for who you really are and value you. My grandfather saw me. My grandmother sees me. And now Emma sees me too. And that, I guess, is enough for now.